my make-believers with your head up in the clouds. And here's to all my dreamers, the ones who stand out in a crowd. Here's to all my people thinking outside of the box, doing what they love instead of being who they're not. To all the widows, all my freaks, you are the heroes, wild and free. When the haters try to bring you down, remember that you are proud. I said remember that you are proud. Stand your ground. Free flag fly. Stand your ground. You are amazing. Stand your ground. Nobody's gonna tell you who you are. Stand your ground. Stand your. And I love you.
He was born on January 16th, 1993. He has bipolar 1 disorder and is a 2-time suicide attempt survivor. Despite his labels, he has prevailed. Congratulate him. He recently got hired as a disability advocate. On November 17th, 2024, he got engaged. Everything is looking up for Kerry. Say hi.
Sure. Kerry, and that's Kerry. I definitely have a story to share. I have a voice, and I am a local, so I was excited about that project for sure.
The answer is because you saw it at the Pride picnic?
Yeah, and I thought it was, in my own life, it's important that locals understand that queer people are local, born and raised too, that we're here. It's not just, big Albany trying to tell people what to do or whatever. So I have no problem saying I'm born and raised in Brownville, New York, which is a tiny village that is pretty much adjacent to Watertown, New York. So basically a tiny little suburb, but with like a rich, I think I would say preserved small town history. Like we have the Brown Mansion, and we were very involved in the War of 1812. So I went to a high school called General Brown High School, named after like the most prominent general in the War of 1812. In a lot of ways. I am queer, I identify as queer. I'm a trans man, and I have very close partners and family members who also identify as queer, and a lot of friends who identify as queer. That's a complicated question, and to the point we were saying earlier, it's always a process. When I was very young, I knew I liked girls in I think a romantic way. Like when I was 4, I remember the romance part of Lion King resonated with me, and I thought I was little kid Simba, and I had a crush on a girl, you know what I mean? So I knew that I liked girls very young, but I was born a female, so that meant that I was gay, but I don't think consciously knew that was okay until, so I actually came out to my mom when I was 14. I think I really knew overtly that I liked girls when I was 11, 12, and kind of was navigating how to exist and live my truth, but also be safe, you know what I mean? Not be ousted or rejected, and I really just didn't know what it would be like if I talked about it. So when I was 14, I know I came out to my mom about liking girls, and then when I graduated high school, I can remember moments of being pretty sure that I was a trans man. It's just that trans people were not even visible to me until I was in high school, except for Chaz Bono. And those articles and headlines about Chaz Bono were horrible. They were in the Inquirer or whatever on Yahoo News, and they were inflammatory, and they treated him like a freak a lot of the times, I think, just to get clickbait. But also when I was a kid, I have a very specific memory of in second grade, I started developing breast tissue. So I had like a lump under my nipple. And my mom took me to the doctor to make sure that it wasn't, anything like that wasn't supposed to be there. And that's when I found out what puberty would look like for me. I think I had lived kind of like just kind of how I showed up, not really thinking about gender much prior to that. I gravitated to the little boys' clothes. And it's like, I don't ever remember making it about gender, but I do remember comments like, that's the little boys section. Don't you want to be in the little girls section? Me being like, no, I want to wear that, And so when I found out what puberty meant for me from the doctor and then from my mom in second grade, I have a very vivid memory of just sobbing and being like, I don't want to go through that. I don't want that. I want to be like dad. And mom was like, maybe you won't develop very much, or, your cousin, it was late for her or whatever. And, it didn't work out like that for me. But then when I was a senior, I had a pretty good idea that I was trans, but what that meant was needing to have $8,000 to have top surgery. And in order for me to even think of that kind of money at 18, I think, had to tell my parents. And I just didn't know how they would react. I don't think they would have been intentionally mean or anything like that. I think they might have worried for me because there still was no visibility much in 2011. So not until I was, it was October of 2021 that I started testosterone. And it had been 2021, I think, that I was slowly unpeeling the like, oh, okay, this like non-binary thing that I'm seeing, it makes a lot of sense to me. Actually, I got a book from the Flower Memorial Library. It's a graphic novel about gender theory, and I absolutely love it. It basically talks about how gender is a performance and a construct, and like this is how we got to where we are, and about a lot of the great philosophers and psychologists and their take on gender and how it's evolved. And like after reading that, I was just like, oh, that's me. Like, I don't fit into these binaries at all. And so I tiptoed into like being non-binary, and I think I quickly realized that I'm a man, like I'm a trans man. And I think it's important for me to talk about being a trans man as well, because I don't have the lived experience of a cis man. I'm unique in that way, and that's been good and it's been bad, and it also just is. So yeah, that's my long answer. The real answer there is probably 2 years ago. I realized that who I am is always going to be a process, that it is not a finite destination, if that makes sense.
That does make sense. I mean, I mentioned earlier how some people didn't find out who they really were or their truth until late in life. So yeah, whenever I'm on Threads, whenever I'm on Twitter, sometimes on Instagram, I usually see people who are way older than I am. I'm 45.
Mm-hmm.
Who are coming out of the closet like in their 50s and their 60s.
Absolutely. And it's part of the reason I learned that, I think, so literally is because I talked about like girls. So then as I was transitioning, I realized I think I had always been attracted to men. But it really through the Q Center, what helped was in our training, our volunteer trainings, they talk about all the different kinds of love. There's platonic, there's aesthetic, there's romantic, there's like the other two that I can never think of, but they're equally as important. And I think that I have always been physically attracted to men. I have yet to feel like romantically towards men, but that part of me really didn't become unlocked until I transitioned, because I realize now the way men viewed me as a cis woman did not feel comfortable to me, regardless of, if they saw the real me or whatever. Like, I just always felt safer with the women that I was attracted to. And I think that allowed like romantic feelings. And I'm honestly, so I am ethically non-monogamous. I live with my partner MK and her other partner Brandon, and we've lived together for 2 years. I'm also just curious to see, like I said, like I'm still finding out who I am. So I try not to put myself in any, so I don't reject labels like bi or pan, because I've come to realize bi is more open-ended than a lot of people might think, because there's like a famous bisexual manifesto. So those words are like interchangeable to me. So I think I align with a lot of things. And at the same time, I watch, younger kids put themselves in boxes of I'm a lesbian. And then when it comes up that they might not be just or specifically a lesbian, they're having this like identity crisis. And so it's really important for me to be like, don't let that label become another box. You know what I mean? So I think, and then there's the whole history of labels came from colonizers. You know what I mean? Like the Native Americans, in my understanding, didn't make it a big deal. They didn't make gender or, I mean, not even just they did make it a big deal, but they revered two-spirit people. And I think a lot of these, like this language that we use is very like, comes from, Anglo-Saxon people. It's against, I think, like our natural existence. And so I think what I've been finding, at least personally, is that the more I lean in towards just naturally being myself, the more I don't even need to call it anything,
Yeah, we need labels anyway.
Yeah. I mean, labels are, this is about the, the gender theory book I found. Labels are great for advocating. They're great for having power, showing that we're all out here, that we exist. But as far as like us identifying with them, like I said, they can become another box,
So it's called the gender theory?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
There's a queer theory one and the gender theory one. And they're so, like, I have bought them for queer kids questioning themselves, like 18-year-olds. And I have said to them, I don't need that back. You pass it on to somebody who needs it. Like, I remember coming out to my dad after my mom, and that was more because I didn't know what he was going to say, because some of the things he said about gay men, I think were not, at the time, they wouldn't have been the worst things, right? He wasn't calling them any sort of derogatory names. I think he was just expressing his lack of understanding for it. Well, and also I think he was thinking about the world. And I think that happens a lot too, is like the parents think, kid, if you're going to be this, you're going to get a lot of hate, because I know, like, I've seen the hate that people like you get, and like they want to protect their kids. So you want to be like, are you sure? Like, you don't have to know, like, you know what I mean? And I think that's very much where my dad was coming from. And with Dad, I was like, no, I know. Like, I'm 15, but I've had these feelings my whole life. Like, I know what I'm talking about. And you kind of just, we kind of just left it there for a month. And then I had a girlfriend, and I think, like, in his mind, he was just like, oh, this is normal, this is like as if I were to have, not even a son, but like, this is like, I've seen this high school relationship style play out. And like, I really like, my kid's girlfriend, and like, it just wasn't even a thing after that. And I think that my existence has, like, how could it not educate my family, because I have 2 older straight sisters, you know what I mean? Like, they're completely cis and straight. We had a very, obviously, as similar as you can imagine, upbringing. But then I wound up like the way I am. So I think that really opened my parents' eyes, and now they're just nothing but proud of me. And my mom, she volunteered for hospice for a while, and someone on literally her deathbed talked about, my grandkid, I just don't understand. And my mom was able to say, my kid is like that, and you just have to love them. And I like to think that, like, that became like a deathbed like moment that grandparent wouldn't have gotten with their grandkid, had my mom not kind of just casually set that record straight. And so I think about the ripple effects of just existing publicly like that constantly. That is like one tiny example of me finding my own truth and being brave about it to my mom. And then my mom, and even my mom, she's still a Catholic, but she's like, there are things I don't agree with, and to me, that's like, when you figure out gender is binary, you're kind of like, well, what else is binary? Things are not good or bad, right? Things are way more complex than that. And when I think about people who are Christians, people who are literally anything, I'm like, that shouldn't mean automatically a set of stereotypes. And I feel like I have that unique gaze because I've lived the life I live. And I've been like, any stereotypes thrown at me, I'm often like, that doesn't apply. I will say this. So like my understanding of it has progressed because I've heard queer advocates, I wish I could think of who, talk about things like, well, why should we have to come out? Because when you're playing into this, like, we have to come out, you're playing into this, I'm pretty sure I actually read this in Queer Theory. You're playing into this like narrative that straight is normal. And who said, you know what I mean? Who said straight is normal? Like I said, the colonizer said straight is normal. We're just people. We just exist. We're natural. We wind up how we are. And so to have to come out can be a little bit like repressive, I think. It's like, oh, you're not like normal, so we expect you to tell us, you know, the second you think you're not normal or whatever, or we expect you to have to tell us. I never told my mom or my parents that I was in a relationship with MK who had another partner, like overtly. Like I thought about how are they gonna take this? But I don't even think I ever had the conversation with mom. I think maybe I just more posted about it on Facebook, and she never had to say, like I never had to put myself in the position to ask her for permission to be myself. And she just caught up and understood, if that makes sense. And I think that's my dream for the quote unquote coming out process, is for, like you said, self-discovery, for it to be more self-discovery than it being like, now I have to announce to the world, because I think that can make, you're putting yourself in a position where you're asking people for permission, or you're waiting for their like, oh, okay, that's great, like their support. And that's nice, and that can be nice and very eye-opening. And I got a lot of support, you know, when I felt like I had to come out as gay or trans. You know, I had to talk to my parents about my transition, you know, because I was going to have surgery, and I was, you know, but I came at it by the time, because I had lived a life of being, you know, I got into my late 20s as a queer person. So I was ready to be like, okay, I figured out I'm a trans man. And like, I am, you know, nobody gets to be like, are you sure? Because I'm an adult now, you know, and I've put the thought into this, and I know I am. So I gave no opening for anybody to be like, I don't agree with you. And I have this funny thing I always say, like I was at a bar last night. I was at the VFW at Adams Center, and I got introduced to somebody, and, you know, I was there with my partner's other partner, and people naturally like to know, oh, how does that all work? You know, like they're so curious about it, because you haven't seen that visibility either, you know, the polyamorous visibility in the media, like, and I always like to say to people, you know, we're polyamorous, we're queer, we're from here, regardless of whether or not people agree with our existence, right? Like, because it's silly. People just are like, I don't agree with you. Like, oh, you don't agree with the fact that I am a trans man in your community. That's a fact. You don't get to disagree with that. Like, that's silly. And so I think I've learned, thankfully, that a lot of the hate or the disagreements or the stereotypes, a lot of times when you just ask people questions, they make themselves look ridiculous, you know? And that just gives me a lot of confidence of being like, well, I exist regardless of what anybody else thinks. And if they want to ask, they can ask. At the same time, it's important for me to represent, you know, so maybe wearing rainbow stuff or paint my nails or whatever, because the craziest thing is now people think I'm a cis man. So, you know, when I get into talking to people and I tell them about my history, I guess I'm coming out, but I'm also doing it as like these people have already created this. I've already created this connection and camaraderie with just a stranger. And then I'm like, oh, and I'm a trans man and blah, blah, blah. And I just see them, like the look on their face. They're just like, you're not what, you know, Fox News told me you're supposed to be. Like, you're a really rational guy, and I like you. And I think I slowly start to kind of unravel those like really shitty beliefs in people. And a lot of times I kind of just like walk away, and I'm just like, you know, I'll say to my partner, I think I just blew that guy's mind. Like he's about to go through like an identity issue himself. But so that's, you know, that's part of why when I saw your project, I was like, of course I have to be a part of that. I always tell people I'm an open book because I see those clear ripple effects. So, parenting, right? Like, literally thinking, you know, seeing the progress of when I was a kid, this is what it was like for me. You know, that doesn't mean you need to, that doesn't mean the new generation needs to suffer because I did. That doesn't mean that at all. It more means like have an awareness of that, you know what I mean? And also it's exciting because that means whatever struggle you're going through, it does get better. It got better for me. It got better for the people before me. It just keeps getting better. So we're always trending in the right direction. So talking about it, being visible, volunteering at the Q Center, helping out when I can, my being visible to people, you know, through jobs I've had, I've been involved with groups of like elderly women, like there's an arthritis aquafit pool class at the Y, and I worked with someone that I brought there to do the swimming for years, and I had to transition in front of them, and so I had to own it, regardless of, like I said, if they agreed with me. It was what I was doing, and so I had to tell them, and they cheered for me when I actually told them, you know, and I did not expect that, but a lot of them said to me, that was really brave of you, and I think I just like really changed the ripple effects. And so after that, I got a lot of my granddaughter said she might be gay, you know, she's 19, she's really struggling, and I'm like, okay, you know, like give her my number if you think I can help. And that's the other thing, like I've been very open and available to, you know, talking to people's family members who they might be trans and they need to know where they can get HRT or where they can get resources, you know, for healthcare to cover their top surgery, or who my surgeon was and was it a good experience. So like it boils down to just talking about it, just talking and talking and talking about it. And like I said, people approach me and ask me to like talk to their family members or friends or whatever, and I will. So it's almost like all I have to do is talk about it, and the rest of the work just kind of does itself. Hard conversations, like really hard conversations where people from different walks of life, whether it be virtual or real life or a meetup or even in the comments of News Junkie, which is what you'll find me there a lot. Having these conversations that are like, why do you think that? Who told you that, you know, queer people are the devil? You know what I mean? Or, you know, I was raised Catholic. I'm very open-ended spiritually. Just like I was saying about binaries, I think it's so silly to be raised Catholic and think the Catholic way is absolutely the only way, exactly how I was told, and everybody else is wrong. Like, that's silly to me. I feel like I have a lot of internal ethics and morals from the way I was parented, probably from the Catholic Church too. But it also makes it easy for me to kind of talk to people who use religion to hate people, because I'm like, well, you know, they'll say stuff about the Old Testament, and I will say, literally the existence of the Old Testament to the New Testament shows to me there is progress in religion. Like, we went from the Old Testament was just hate-filled, like Leviticus, like brutal, like gnarly stuff you're supposed to do to people who, in my opinion, make mistakes, you know, unless you're talking about like really evil people or whatever. But and then you go to Jesus, who's literally hanging out with the lepers that nobody else will even look at, you know? And that to me shows progress within Christian religion. And so for people to like just cling to the Old Testament, I'm like, you're missing the whole picture, and you're just letting your fear dictate you. And so I would love to sit down with people, and I really trust that I like know myself really well, and I'm not going to get offended, because I think I see, being from this area, how these attitudes have like been cultivated and just like almost have been unchallenged. You know, I think people hide and they don't get a lot of good education, so they're maybe only watching one source or two sources of media, and they're only talking to their husband or wife and then the people they're working with, and they're not breaking out of their bubble and seeing that queer people are actually people and we're here. I say this a lot. Like I said, a lot of people think I'm a cis man when they meet me. So I tell people, like, we are everywhere. We are your doctors and your nurses and your teachers. And, you know, we walk your dog, or we're taking care of your kids, and you don't even know it. And you're just like, you know, people are out here just saying really ignorant stuff. And I would like to see people actually be curious about queer people, you know? Like, oh, well, what was your experience? Let me just listen to it. And then I'm like, if then you want to say, you know, I hate you so much, you're the worst, you're the devil, I guess go ahead, like you already have been. But just like actually listen to people and their stories. I had a classmate who always wanted to go into politics, and then he did. I think he lives in Texas now. And I talked to him recently, and he said, if you weren't my classmate in high school, I would probably be a raging homophobe, because his influence about how queer people was very narrow, and it was how the conservative media depicted us. And to him, I was just really like, you know, a down-to-earth person that was just like, you know, oh, I'm gay. And for him to see that, like, oh, this normal human being that's just doing their best and like is gay and like grew up in the same, you know, school area that I did, like, oh, it's just, they're just normal, they're just people. And so visibility for us on the queer behalf is a big deal. And just having those conversations, I never want people to push their boundaries or their limits if someone's being really hateful to them. I think it's really important to recognize, like, this is not going anywhere. You know, I'm going to walk away from this now. But I tend to have the spoons or the mental availability to have those hard conversations with people. I've often thought about like cabling somewhere and just being like, I'm a trans man, ask me anything. But I do worry about the unhingedness of some folks, and the paranoia and how that translates to, you know, my safety. So I do think about that a lot as well.
Yeah, I mean,
So it's a difficult balance, but
sometimes you have to just like understand that it takes sacrifice in everything that you do, everything that you are.
yeah. And if I expect people to listen to me, I have to listen to them. So like I am very curious about what makes people think these like terrible, hateful thoughts that they have. And like I said, I really do think it's just being in a bubble. And I think, you know, their televisions, and I say this a lot, like your TV has conditioned you to think I'm this horrible monster. And I'm literally this person standing right near you in your community, and you think I'm the devil. And I'm like, that is profitable for the news media. That is helpful for the political party that is doing that. That is like, they don't care about you. You're a pawn. You know what I mean? So like, I think it's really important to just listen and find ways to be heard and just make connections in our immediate geographic community over national news, or care about local politics, because those politics are actually the ones that really affect us. Of course, presidential ones do in a way, but if you're spending 24/7 being obsessed with the presidential election, you are missing so much in your actual community.
Anything you want to say to our audience?
Yeah, I could definitely speak on that. I would say it's never too late I don't even want to put the pressure on anyone to change their opinions, but to just listen and see what happens, right? Like, you don't have to cling to anything. Like, it's never too late to listen, to investigate why you've come up with the attitudes that you have. And also just like, it ruins your life and your mental health to just hate a whole class of people that exists. So like, what good is in it for you, you know? If people think that we are pedophiles, like that's a lie. That's propaganda. That's a lie. You know, I'm sure, like, statistically, are there queer people who are pedophiles? Of course, just like anybody else, like any other group of people. But just because we're queer, I can't even believe I have to say that. Just because we're queer doesn't mean we're a pedophile. Like, that's gross. That's wrong. Just find and ask, you know, to the best of your ability, your local queer person, just how you can do better. And stop, like, think about maybe you're isolating your family for a political party or a political figure that doesn't even know you and doesn't even care about you, but just wants your money. And now you maybe don't talk to your kid anymore because you refuse to listen to them and you want to listen to what you think you know is right. And that's just not how life works. It never has been. Also, queer people have always existed. Ancient Greece, Native Americans, Shakespeare, like the Shakespearean times, queer people have always existed. We just haven't called it by any name, or we've called it by different names or whatever. But this is not new. It's not new. So, I mean, as binary as it gets to me is like, you're going to be on the wrong side of history or you can be on the right side of history. And it's never too late to start fact finding and challenging your own opinions. Like for me as a queer person, even, it's important for me to always like see, oh, why do I think that? Why might I think that? Like, was it something that my dad literally just said? And when I was a child and I like, you know, I give myself a break. Did I just believe it because my dad said it? You know, like, and that's fair, that's valid. You know, if people hate me because they don't know me or they had the wrong idea, that's valid. Like, I understand that. You know, we're not going to just, queer people are not going to stand here and just hate people forever if they've ever said anything homophobic. I was recently saying, I had a cousin tell me once, you know, the Clintons actively worked against the blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, yeah. And like, you know, my parents used to say mildly homophobic shit, but they are the most sweetest like people. They just really didn't understand and they're the most supportive. So like, evolution is important, you know? I think that's about it.
Say that I'm innocent either.
Yeah. And same with queer people. I mean, internalized homophobia is real. Like, we grew up hearing all this stuff, and so to hide, we might be like, you know, oh, look over there at that gay person. You know what I mean? So like, it was a survival. Like, we were taught the shitty stuff too. We were taught to hate ourselves, you know? And so like, part of my happiness, my like big well of happiness comes from, I was able to, like, literally pride. I was able to take what I was always told, you know, or from just various places in the media or whatever, is wrong, is unnatural, is a choice. And I was able to understand that's not the case, and like figure it out on my own, which makes me feel really powerful and capable, and like I want to like spread that happiness to people.
Well, thank you, Kerry. Thank you for spreading your happiness.
Yeah, of course.
I walk to the beat of a different drum. I'm gonna shine brighter than the sun. You know there ain't no other one, 'cause I give all or none. I walk to the beat of a different drum.